Hello everyone, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Bianca.
And welcome back to the Preservice PodSQUAD podcast.
Today we're talking with Hannah Pawlak, who is actually a former Preservice president and TCNJ alum, and right now she teaches English and special education in Middlesex County, and she also serves as a consultant for NJEA. And this whole series that we're about to start is all about getting the job for teaching and starting to work in the space of education. So we're going to be focusing today a lot on the interview process and, what's the right thing to say during an interview, what's some things that you want to avoid, and kind of just getting some more perspective about this whole interview process that already in my mind seems a little ambiguous. But Hannah, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experiencing with interviews in your district or hiring people?
Well, thank you guys for having me. This is really exciting. So basically in my district, because I'm a self-contained educator, I do a lot of paraprofessional hiring and hiring for job coaches, people who are looking to come into my program. And previously, when I taught English, I actually did a lot of English special ed interviews. So how interviewing oftentimes works, at least in my district, and I know that a lot of districts do it in the same kind of way, is they have a committee. So it's not just me as a teacher sitting and interviewing the person. It's more of me, my building administrator, potentially the special ed director or supervisor, maybe both. They even have a parent sometimes for fall time.
Really?
Yeah. When I was going through my interview, it was like walking into a dinner party I didn't know I was walking into.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like a surprise party, just a little.
That's kind of cool.
Party, a little more surprise. So basically, that's kind of how it's kind of going that way for a lot of districts. But it also depends when you do get hired and when you're interviewing. So I know that the interviews that happen during the year, let's say you're a December graduate, or you're just looking to become a para in your free time after you graduate from college, just for a little experience in the school system. Well, those interviews tend to be smaller because it's harder to get a really big committee, while the interviews headed toward the summer are oftentimes larger, so they have more people on it.
How many people usually sit on those committees? Is it 3 people or about how many?
So in my experience, and it could be you go into a district and it's just you and the administrator. It could be a one-on-one interview like that. In my district, there was probably about 10 when it's really large.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. Whoa. And smaller committees, we have about 5. So it would be the person comes in and there's usually the principal, a representative from the staff, and maybe 1 or 2 more admin and another representative from the staff.
Could you typically expect a representative from the department you're interviewing for? For example, I'm going to be history, so would there be someone from the social studies department in that interview?
Yes. So normally, and again, I'm just speaking from my experience, so you could go into a district and it could have none of this. But I do know a lot of my friends who interviewed and who are still interviewing did have the same experience, but usually it is somebody. I've interviewed for people who are going to be doing self-contained and special ed English. So I've never interviewed somebody to be, I would say, a history teacher. I've never interviewed an elementary teacher because I'm in the high school. Principal interviews and admin interviews are very different, and then they might actually call you on. So if you were hiring for your building principal, I could sit on that kind of interview committee, but it's usually somebody for a teacher or an educator of any sorts who would be interacting with you on your team.
That makes sense. And speaking about the structure of the interview, I know a really big question a lot of people struggle with is tell me about yourself. That's kind of an overwhelming question. It's very broad, but a lot of people do hear that at the beginning of their interview, so it kind of sets the tone. So how do you recommend pre-service educators prepare to address that question when they're going into an interview?
Well, it's funny you say that, because that is honestly, you can expect that to be the first question, I would say about 90% of the time. And it's bizarre because we kind of know what we're interviewing when you step into the room, because we see your resume. So we see your resume and your letters of intent and your recommendation letters. We've read them already. So when you come and tell us about yourself, you are telling us a lot of what we already know. So I suggest the ones that we really like are people who come in, tell us a little bit about your professional background, because to be honest, that's why you're there. You're not there because, I don't know, you made a really good pizza. That's not really how. But we kind of want to know that. Do you have a side hustle that you are really passionate about as well? Are you an artist in your free time, just as a hobby? Something fun, so that we're interviewing a person. You shouldn't be, you're not as professional as I do suggest that you come off. We also want you to be yourself. And if yourself isn't jiving with them, and I've had interviews like that, I'll probably tell you later in the podcast, had some weird ones. No district's name, but I've had some strange, and I realize I'm not clicking. You probably will not click. In the sense of when you work there, it will probably be the same vibe. So definitely give a little bit about your professional background. You don't have to go through your whole CV. And then some fun stuff. Maybe you have 10 brothers and sisters. We want to know.
That's a good tip. I wouldn't have thought of bringing in personal stuff like that. I would have thought to just keep it professional and solely related to education. So that is a good idea to kind of set yourself apart from the other people they're interviewing, to bring a bit of personality into it, because that is a piece of your teaching as well, how much you bring yourself into the classroom. And that's important, as we've spoken about before, about building relationships with students. So that is really important.
There's a line, though.
That's true.
Right. So I've been in an interview where somebody they tried to bring themselves into it, and everything was going great, and they were like, I'm divorced. And I was like, oh, how do you want me to react to that? I don't know if I should say congrats or I'm sorry, or
No.
Right.
I don't know where we're at here. So that made it a little awkward. But yes, keep it a professional, personal thing. And you might want to just hide your weird a little bit until you can let it out a little later when you get hired. We want your weird. We want all of you, everyone. We're all very unique and different and fun, and we want to see that. Just a little sprinkle of it in the interview. Just not, I don't know if we're going to do a resume one, not on your resume, because we have seen people put personal things on their resume as well. That's a little strange. So resume, very professional. I think interview, you could get a little more personal to a professional extent.
About the resume, because I know that in high school, they would tell you to put your personal interests at the bottom. So I would go there and be like, I like reading and skiing and all of this Star Wars movies. So is that would that be too much? Is that what you mean? Completely remove personal interests, or do you still feel like personal interests are something to put on your resume?
So I think if you have the room for it, I don't personally mind it, as long as you're not putting familial information on there. I've seen that. If you have 2 kids, I don't really know if that's a resume-esque thing. Personal interests, though, I think when you're in high school and when you're in maybe even early collegiate settings and just space in your life, you don't have enough to fill the pages. If you have other things to put that are maybe a little bit more relevant, it's just my preference that you do that, and we learn about this other fun stuff in the interview. If you have to fill space, though, I'm not opposed to it, as long as it's professional.
I do think that's an issue that sometimes pre-service educators struggle with, because we don't have a lot of experience yet. We're still in college. And so a lot of times people debate about what they're putting on their resume and including certain clubs and activities on their resume. And so would you recommend kind of infusing that if you don't have a whole lot of work experience?
Yes, definitely. So clubs and activities definitely should be on there. Some people will have to pick and choose whatever is most relevant to the job. If you are applying, let's say your history job, right? History club is relevant if there is a history club or a historical society that you're part of. If you're part of, I don't know, walking club. My favorite sport. I think maybe that might take a bit of a back seat if you had to save some space.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. To connect back to kind of what you're bringing up in the interview, I know this is something that I'm thinking about. I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way. For people who are not in 5-year programs right now in their pre-service experience, a lot of people are probably looking to pursue their master's once they get into the field. And so a lot of conversation around that right now is that districts will pay for at least a portion of your degree. So do you recommend bringing up the idea in your interview that you're interested in receiving your master's, and how can you kind of like approach that track?
I definitely think you have to read the room. So if they're asking you about future plans and where you want to see yourself in 5 years, there's no reason why you couldn't bring something like that up, because education, we want people to be wanting to learn about education. And I think school and college is one of the most crazy PDs you can do. You are sitting in PD all day. You guys probably have more PD than I've taken in my career right now. So I think it's something you could mention. Do I think you should say immediately while you're mentioning it, and do you pay for that? I don't know if I would go that direction, but I think if you wanted to mention that you're into it, there's nothing, it can't hurt.
Right. Say you interviewed with multiple districts and maybe you're deciding between 2 positions and you're not sure where to go. It might be a deal breaker for someone to see if one district is going to pay for it and if one is not. So at that point in the interview application process, is it appropriate to ask the district? I was wondering if you guys would be covering this, maybe how much, maybe that could be a deciding factor for someone.
Yeah, so for me personally, I don't find that to be a problem. I think it's all in the wording. So if you ask about tuition reimbursement rather than would you pay for me, you're saying the same thing, but everything you're saying is coming off a little bit differently. As pre-service members, you guys have access to contracts, and this is something that would be in the contract. So if you know that you're deciding between districts or you're interviewing somewhere, you could reach out to NJEA and ask to see the contract and see if that's in there. And if it's not, maybe it's something you want to ask about, but you can also assume that they don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Would it, if you didn't already have your master's, or I should say, like if you had already earned your master's and you were coming in with a master's degree, how is that viewed, like within the interview process? Because I know that a lot of school districts have a pay raise for students who are coming in with master's degrees, but then they have to pay more, and they already have such under-resourced schools that would they be willing to do that? What's the benefit of getting a master's degree in the first place?
A lot of times you're going to need it for certain degrees. So for example, special education right now, I can't really think of a special education program in the state of New Jersey that is going to certify you without the master's. Is there one? Maybe. Do I know of them? I don't. But let's say you want to be general education and you don't need that specialization. You could have a master's and you can go get a master's. I don't think it's going to hurt you. I think it's something that's becoming more and more common within the collegiate setting. And maybe you guys see it as well. One thing didn't require a master's 5 years ago that now requires a master's. And I think it's one of those things when I see someone has a bachelor's and I see someone has a master's, I don't really think anything of it. And maybe because I'm not paying them. And maybe that's, from the Board of Education might look at that. I don't think anybody, at least in my district, has not been hired because they had a master's.
I see. Let's say you're comparing 2 candidates and one candidate does have a master's versus a candidate that does not have a master's degree. Do you kind of take one candidate to be better than the other candidate because they have a master's degree, or that doesn't really have a factor in your decision?
I think that's a really personal, it depends on the interview committee. I have never been in a meeting where that was the final deciding factor. Sometimes we deliberate over 2 people and we're going back and forth, sometimes even 3, but we never say, oh, this person has an extra degree, they must be better at math teaching. We've never had that. Maybe though, if they have a certification area that they have the master's in that's different than their certification area, that's really large for administration right now, because at the time of this shortage that we're currently in, people are trying to, it's kind of like a plug and play situation sometimes. So if you have a special ed degree and another content area, and you start in a content area, but your special ed teacher quit, they now can fill that. But it also goes vice versa. So people look for, I would say, versatility and more certifications than they do a master's in the same certification that you already have.
So you mentioned situations where you might be deciding between 2 people, 3 people, maybe even more. What has been the deciding factor when you're looking at those resumes?
So it's, when we're looking at the resume, it's very, very rare that the person comes in and they are their resume. A resume is, I think it's the starting line of the mile that we had to run in like middle school or high school. That is where we're at. It's like maybe even just the first 100 yards or whatever, because every time somebody comes in, I think one thing about them that they put on a resume, when they come in for their interview, there's many times they can't speak to it. That's really, if you put something on your resume, at least be able to speak at it, because we may ask. It may be something that someone just threw on there as like, oh, I did that. But if I ask, that can really work against you. So it's an interview that does a lot of the deciding factors. We also do demo lessons. I don't know how much of you guys have heard of those. Those are extremely common when it comes to the hiring process. You have your resume, you have your interview. First you have the application, then you have your with your resume, and then you have the interview. Maybe round 2, demo lesson.
What is a demo lesson? Like, what does that require you to do? And is it after the interview, or would you do it like sort of as like you did the interview, they liked you, so now you're moving on to the next stage, or how does it? Okay.
It's usually a next stage thing. You may see some districts combine it. And a lot of times other job categories don't really have something equivalent. So this is kind of teacher specific. There may be a equivalent for like somebody in the child study team. I have yet to see it. But a demo lesson is you finish the interview, they want to narrow the pool of candidates. Now we're going to go on to round 2 of interviews. Oh yeah, while you're here, you're going to plan a demo lesson so we can see how you teach. It's very telling with a few caveats, because you understand, or you would hope that your interviewers understand, that this is a group of students who they don't know.
Right.
They really don't know leveling. They're coming in the middle of usually curriculum. You're going to get this a lot within, let's say you fill out the application, you have your interview. I would say late April, more commonly May and June, when the students are still around.
That was my next question. Like, would it be in front of the committee, or is it with a class like that?
It's with a class normally. I have had to do one where it was just to a bunch of people because it was in the summer, and it was weird. I don't actually know what they got from that. I didn't ask. I could have if I really wanted feedback, but I don't. I think it's much more telling how they interact with students in the setting in which they may teach. It's the point of it. But we do understand that that's not, you're new.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But would it be directly after the interview, or would they call you back a different day? Like, would it be on the spot? Okay.
Oh, yeah, they have to prep you. So they'll be prepping you. So they would say something like, hey, we loved your first interview. We'd love to bring you back to round 2. So we want to see a demo. What we're going to see in this demo is, here's the age you're teaching or grade. Here's the content area you can teach. Sometimes they have anything you want. Sometimes they have something that they want. If you're English, it sometimes it really is horrible, because they're in the middle of this book. And you're like, I didn't read that. There's dark notes in it. But it's just about a half-hour lesson. And you, the committee, you, sometimes different people, sometimes the same, are in the room, and the kids are in the room, and the other teacher is in the room, and you just have at it and pray technology works and break out your backup plan if it doesn't.
And about how much time do they give you between giving you notice and actually having to do the lesson? Because you have to have like planning time in there.
Usually a week.
Okay.
That's plenty of enough time.
Yeah,
I feel.
absolutely.
It is, yeah. So hopefully come up with something.
I was concerned that they would make you do it right after the interview, and then I was like,
oh. You like sit down in the office or something, like, okay, now plan out a whole lesson.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, you got, so I guess in college, at this point in your career, they haven't talked to you yet.
I haven't heard of that.
I
No,
have not
this
heard
is
of
my
that
first
either.
time.
Oh, yeah,
hearing
demo
about that.
lessons.
But we've done a lot of like mock lessons, like, you know, do lesson planning and then present it to the class sort of thing. But so I guess that's similar, where you do get some period of time to plan and then present to your peers. But I didn't know that this was a real life experience outside of the classroom.
Oh,
so
surprise!
great to know that it's another one of those surprise parties.
Oh, yeah.
True. Lots of
Everyone's watching.
surprises. To speak to like more portions of the interview, so we kind of touched upon the tell me about yourself question, and then towards the end you often get asked, do you have any questions for us? And I know some people sometimes are not expecting that, and they often say, no, I don't have any questions, or their only question is, oh, when might I hear back from you? So what do you recommend is the best response to that, and kind of what questions should you use in that portion?
So it's going to depend on what they've already asked you. I do suggest asking at least 2 questions. It's going to be your livelihood, most likely, and your primary job. You're going to want to know a few things about it. And if you truly don't want to know anything else about that district, maybe that's not the district for you. Maybe you're just not truly curious enough about it, or you've just done enough research. I'm not really sure. I think curriculum questions are always safe, even if you already know because you decided to look it up ahead of time. Ask it. Maybe you want to ask about staff meetings. Do they happen in the beginning of the day? Do they happen at the end of the day? What does the schedule look like? How much time, let's say if you're elementary, do they have for ELA? Are they in blocks? So is it going to be some teachers in elementary only teach science and math now, and some only teach English and social studies? Is that the situation? So there's a lot of, you can look up district initiatives. They're all on the website. A lot of times the committee staff, the admin will really like that out of anybody. Ask about the students.
Do you feel like it's safe to also talk about sort of the community at the school? Like, I feel like some of my questions would be related to, like, how are they supporting student diversity? Do they, like, for instance, I'm alongside math studying women, gender, and sexuality studies. So I would be interested if they would let me teach a class in both subjects, or, you know, do they have a GSA club at the school, or like things like that, to learn more about the community and like how they're supporting different intersectional identities. So do you think that's safe, or is it sort of something to save for later, or kind of research on your own?
I think it's a great question.
Okay.
There is nothing asking about opportunities to run Schedule B type things like clubs, sports, all that. Absolutely ask. If you want to ask about diversity and inclusion, definitely ask. They are most likely going to ask you. At this point, in a lot of different interviews that I've been in, it is always on the interview docket. When I was interviewing, it was also asked to me quite a bit. And I think if they don't ask, or if there's something else like you want to extend with the club and organization idea, I think that's great.
See, okay. I know that sometimes it is difficult to learn about exactly like how the school runs, so I would definitely be the person to be asking those sorts of questions to try and unpack that a little bit. But do you think that school districts, like from the committees that you've been on, is it possible that they don't tell like applicants everything, or there's like stuff that you just don't find out about until you start teaching there? Or
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
it's kind of like, you don't, it's kind of, okay, so let me put it this way. Everybody comes in, right, as a human being, and human beings have their strengths and then they have their flaws, but we don't just lay all our flaws out on the table when we interview. When someone says, oh, can you tell me your greatest weakness or in areas which you need support? You're not like, let me list it, right? Nobody does that. The school district is going to do the same, and there's always room for improvement within the school districts. And I think that as schools change and policy change and students change and shift, I think, yeah, we're not just going to be like, we're really struggling right there.
A through Z. I understand. Okay.
Sometimes they might be like, we're looking for someone who could help us with XYZ.
Okay.
But you will find out other things.
Do you think it's appropriate to also ask about what specifically you may be teaching? Like, for example, me as history, there's definitely a wide variety in social studies that I could do. So is it appropriate to ask what positions are available, what classes I might be teaching, stuff like that?
Yes. Yeah, you definitely can. Sometimes they'll know, sometimes they won't. So it can also change. So one time I went in for an interview and I was supposed to be going in for an interview strictly for special ed English, and it turned out to be much more self-contained than I thought, which is fine. It just wasn't where, and then they couldn't really tell me which avenue I would be at because they were still sorting out their staff. They have until May, I think it's like mid-May, to tell staff if they're rehired or not. Once that happens, then you still have people who change or look for different districts or move, all these other things that happen. So that's why you'll see things come up periodically, but definitely ask if they know.
Yeah, definitely.
I just have a follow-up question, but I'm sort of switching gears here. Because I want to jump back to the conversation we were having about master's degree. This is something like during the interview process, when you come in with different degrees, how does it look if you're coming in with a PhD? If you have some sort of like doctoral degree and you're still looking to teach high school, like I know for me personally, I was considering doing something like that where it would be a combined master's and PhD program. And it's just so that I wouldn't have to worry maybe like about starting when I start my own family or just like have other responsibilities that I wouldn't want to go back to school. So is that looked at differently? And I apologize for jumping back to the master's degree conversation.
Oh, don't apologize.
It just like came back to me and I was like, I forgot to ask that question. So I wanted to jump back.
Yeah, I've never been in an interview where the committee looked down on a PhD. So I think education in the institution is respected. And when somebody wants to do that and better themselves and get the doctoral degree, because that's the right path and avenue for them, I've never interviewed someone where I was like, mark that against them. I think people are really interested in that. We do talk a lot when you do come in with your doctoral degree about, I've never been in an interview where somebody was coming right from college, because we usually talk about what their previous experience was, whether it's at another school or maybe even maybe it's their second career. And that's awesome too. People enter education at various times.
Yeah.
But if you want to get it. And you're going to find a school that's going to honor it. And we have some at ours. I think it's great.
Again, with more education also comes like the school district having to pay more to support you because you have more degrees.
It's also in that contract. So when you're interviewing for a district that you really want, and you do ask NJEA as a pre-service member, can I have that contract? Can I see it? Can I look over it? You could do that at convention, or you could just reach out. You will see the pay guide and the salary guide and the different steps within the contract. So sometimes in the scope of things, because that's what you've been told, and when I was in college, it's what I was told too, it seems to be this very large jump and oh my God, they're going to have to pay so much more. In the grand scheme of things, a lot of times it's not as much as you think. You're not getting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars more than the bachelor degree candidate. You are performing the same job and the same duties with a different level of mastery of your content area potentially, which is what, higher degree will earn you a little bit more. But I think different districts some have a greater extent, some have not as big as you would think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Within the contract, what's sort of appropriate to negotiate? Like, what are some things that you should do, should not do, or like, how far can you push it, especially as a first-year teacher, maybe when you don't really have experience outside of substitute teaching?
Well, you can push it a little farther now than you could in previous years.
That's true.
And I would encourage you to do so. So a lot of the interview process works like you come, you interview with the team or the principal in the building. A lot of times there's a second interview. After the second interview, that's usually when you know you got it or not, because school districts don't want to put in so much time and energy to candidate that they're hiring, not because they don't care about it, but you really don't know what the person can do until they start doing it. So I guess maybe I should say it's not that they want to put in time and energy, but 2 interviews and a demo lesson is way more than enough to just get the energy. But the third interview is with the superintendent, and usually only the superintendent. That will give the stamp of approval. So if the committee pushes someone forward, if the superintendent says no, it's a no. I should even go a step up next is then you're on the board minutes. And if they say no, even if the super says yes, then it's a no. Doesn't happen often. But the superintendent does have the final, yes, this goes on the board agenda. Most districts. When you get to the third interview with the superintendent, if that is your third interview, whatever, that is your only time you can negotiate for yourself. So there's no other time after you sign your contract and get that job that you can go back and be like, actually.
Wait, I forgot that. Let's put that back in there.
Yeah, it really doesn't work like that because your union will negotiate for you. But if you want to start on a higher step, and if you feel like you earn, maybe you have 30 credits past your bachelor degree, and you want to argue that that's, bachelor plus 30, do it there.
Not later.
Yeah, it doesn't work out too well later, especially with the steps.
That's a good piece of advice. You talked about so many really valuable things for me. I appreciated this, and so I'm sure Bianca, you do too, and everyone listening. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask what your biggest piece of advice would be for people out there who are preparing for interviews. It can be a stressful and overwhelming time, so what would you like to send the message to them for someone who's preparing for that?
I don't want it to be cliche, but I think it is incredibly important to you. Obviously, because you're going to go into a professional career within a professional context. So educators are professionals and we should always act that way, but we're different personalities and different people. And to see how that works with the administration that you will be working with and the team that you will be working with is invaluable. And again, I've said it, like one of the interviews I was on, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I don't know if they like me. I don't think they did. Never heard from them again. But would it have worked? I can't say it would have. So if they do call you back and you didn't get that, I really want to be here and I want to be talking to that person a lot, because you will. Just find something that fits you. And if you try it for a year, revisit this episode on interviews, because you can switch districts and there's nothing wrong with it. There's really nothing wrong with it, and it shouldn't be a taboo thing. So find the best fit for you. The more time you could spend talking to the people, just like we're talking now, conversationally instead of just like the better.
Do you think that conversation should be continued after the interview? Like, do you feel like it is valuable to like send them an email afterwards and be like, thank you so much for interviewing me? Or is that sort of like doesn't really do anything, doesn't really matter?
Always.
Okay.
Always, always. One of the things that I would suggest is bringing a notepad and taking notes during your interviews. I mean, we're taking notes on them.
Mhm.
They should be also, I shouldn't say should, but taking notes on what we're saying and who the people are in the room so you can look them up and send them that email is so nice. Be prepared to do that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But you should also think about when you're interacting with the people in the room, if you are bringing things like mini portfolios or resume copies, or copies of whatever that you're going to hand out to them, demo, lesson plans, make sure you have enough. It's always better to over than under prepare.
Thank you so much for all of that amazing advice. I feel like when you said go back and listen to this episode, I will literally
We'll be listening to this too, even though we listened to it.
No, because it's really helpful, especially just listening back to like remembering this conversation. It's going to be very, very useful in the future. But thank you for giving us some summary advice and also all the nitty-gritty details about interviews. I feel like I needed that for my personal stuff, but also for everybody listening. I think, I hope it was a helpful conversation. But thank you very much for coming in to speak with us today. And we're looking forward to continuing this series with you. And we're hoping that next week we'll be able to talk about the application process and sort of what that looks like.
Oh, yes. Very important part. Step 1, yeah?
Yes, and what that will look like for us. So yeah, we'll get more to resumes next week. But thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Hannah. We appreciate it.
Guys.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. We appreciate you being here. Be sure to look out for our shorter length episodes, just me and Bianca hanging out for our Motivational Mondays, and more of these full length episodes releasing every Thursday.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a happy Thursday, and we will hear you on the podcast soon.